Next, we come to a headline, a strange headline that you wrote, Mr. Andy Brockman, journalist extraordinaire. And this is a headline which to be honest, you sent it my way a few days ago. I went, look at this. And I was like, okay. When I read the headline, I had no idea what it was about really. But I'm hopefully you're going to explain to me. Pink Wellies get the boot as police intervene to stop metal detecting rally breaching COVID rules. Now, the last bit of that I understand. Pink Wellies? What's going on?
Pink Wellies is a metal detecting group that is organised by two people who are based in the northwest of England, and they organise metal detecting rallies whereby people turn up on a piece of land where they got a permission, pay a fee, usually around £20 a day,
Mm-hmm.
and they're allowed to metal detect. Which I have to say, in parenthesis, metal detecting is perfectly legal in the UK, so long as it's not done on a scheduled site and anything that is treasure is notified under the Treasures Act. And that the land is metal detected with the permission of the landowner, so it's not trespass. Okay, so apart from that, it's a legal pastime. Many people do it. Many metal detectorists work with archaeologists. At the same time, it is extremely controversial among archaeologists because of arguments which we won't rehearse here, but are to do with conservation of the archaeological resource and using jargon like that. Because it is not compulsory to record historical finds if they're not treasure.
No.
So,
well, and also, sorry, and also, there's a related issue as well in terms of the function of artifacts. Are they treasure or are they cultural elements of evidence and stories?
Which is for another day.
Yeah.
This story in particular is about the commercial end of metal detecting. Now, I'll say again, in Pink Wellies say that all the money that they raise goes to landowners as facility fees and to charity. Right?
So it should also be said, sorry, just in that context as well, because we need to be careful, just so people know. Wellies is Wellington boots. Some people may not know. So it's,
it's British jargon for the Wellington boot, the rubber boot or gum boot as it's known in some parts of the world.
Yeah.
Basically, it's a calf length protective boot.
Yes.
Worn in wet conditions and muddy conditions. Yeah. Hence, people metal detecting might want to wear them on a muddy field. The issue that we were highlighting in the article is about large metal detecting rallies, which are often mounted to raise money. And it is alleged, and I'm not talking about Pink Wellies here, but it is alleged that some people basically mount rallies and pocket a good chunk of the proceeds for their own use. Even if they've paid a farmer or whatever. And it is often done quasi under the radar in that you see on social media a rally will be announced, a postcode will be announced the day before or even on the day that people will turn up to. People are asked to provide, then they're not asked to pay in any traceable way like a bank transfer or PayPal, but they're asked to pay in cash on the gate. So there's no, and so then it's then down to the person collecting that cash as to whether any of it's declared or not. And how much, so there is no transparency in many cases. And it is also argued that a massive metal detector on a piece of land has the effect of strip mining the archaeology of any movable metal movable finds and potentially associated non-metal finds that are with those, things like pottery and so on. So they were already controversial before COVID. What has happened since COVID is that the government's rules, and particularly the rule of 6, which came in most recently, which is that more than 6 people can't gather together for any reason outdoors, apart from certain exceptions, has effectively made large metal detecting rallies illegal. What Green Wellies did,
Pink Wellies.
and Sorry, pink wellies. Green wellies are the ones that normal people wear. Sorry, value judgment there. What pink wellies did was go to this is Hertfordshire Police and North Hertfordshire Council. They claimed that they had an exemption because they were a business, charity, or educational, or had an educational function, and called a rally 2 Sundays ago. And the rally was notified to the police by interested bystanders, and the police turned up and said, "No, this is not legal. Go home." They didn't issue any spot fines, which they could have done. They chose to deal with it in a low key way, which was to just tell the event to close down, tell the organisers to close the event down, which they did. There was a lot of huffing and puffing on the on social media. The organizer, one of the organisers, went on social media to claim that the police had got the law wrong, and their interpretation of the law wrong, and that they were making a complaint to the chief constable. But at the same time, although arguably the contract was with them as the organizer of the event, they were refusing to refund the participants, saying that the money had already been paid over to the farmer. Now, we're still investigating all this. Last Sunday, on the same piece of land, the same organisers tried to organise an identical event. And last Friday, they had an email from Hertfordshire Police saying, basically, "We do not believe your event is compliant with COVID regulations. Please do not organise this event. Please liaise with the police." Again, there's much huffing and puffing, but officially the organiser cancelled the event on social media. But it is reported on. I've got reasonable evidence to say that this Sunday, people did turn up to metal detect on this land, arguably ostensibly as individuals, to find that the police had taken up residence there to make sure the event didn't go ahead, and they were turned back. Right. Now, essentially, and the question we're posing really is, first of all, is it responsible to organise this kind of event, which doesn't have to happen, in a time where, and particularly when, for example, the organisers come from the northeast, which is an area that's currently in lockdown, and people come from quite considerable distances to attend these events. One event in the East Midlands that took place over the August Bank during August, I know people were coming from Scotland to take part in. So we talked about students earlier. It is people arguably taking unnecessary journeys to mix with different populations in a time when it is potentially dangerous for people. So is it responsible to organise this kind of event anyway? And is it also responsible to represent yourself as something you're not? And what is the motivation of people who do that kind of thing? Now, I've noticed, I've been doing some checking with Companies House, and in the last few weeks, there have been a number of people who've been registering metal detecting businesses, and it's suspected that they are doing that to enable them to organise rallies and large club rallies and large rallies, commercial rallies, paying rallies during lockdown, because they would then claim a business exception. Yeah. And again, the question is that a responsible thing to do?
And that's a very good question. I'm not really sure I can usefully add much to that. It sounds as though there's some elements just that you need to tie down in relation to actually, for example, the claim that the farmer had received all the money and hence participants can be refunded and so on and so forth. I suppose what I would say though is that we've also attempted to highlight relatively good behaviour as well in this segment in terms of metal detecting, with the headline coming from The Independent on the 10th of September that metal detectorist unearths 1,150-year-old Viking board game. Now, interestingly, this is we were talking about Taffel games with David Petts in the interview that we recently did, and this is the story of 37 original pieces of a board game, were discovered. These are relatively low quality pieces. They're not the high end glass piece that was found on Lindisfarne last year, and they are
Mm.
photographed on a board commissioned by the auctioneer in order to sell them on.
Oh, the auctioneer, right? Okay, so we'll come to that in a minute.
Okay, okay. But this is the news, which I find quite interesting. A metal detectorist has unearthed a Viking board game in Lincolnshire dating back to 872 AD. Mick Bott, a retired miner, made the rare discovery of a complete set of 37 pieces used in Hnefatafl, a chess-like game, although it's not chess-like at all, popular
No.
with soldiers, popular with everyone actually, for its strategic nature next to the River Trent. The 73-year-old had spent 20 years searching for items at the location, where, thanks to his efforts, historians now know Vikings set up camp throughout the winter of 872 AD, which is good in so much as this is someone who found it, and the site's been reported, and use can be made of that information. So I think it's worthwhile highlighting that as a legitimate
Mm.
action by a metal detectorist. From his first detecting session at the Torquay site in 1982, Mr. Bott and two fellow detectorists unearthed hundreds of coins, strap ends, brooches, and mounts, all of which were from the 9th century. So, um, hang on. So what? So in 1982, historians presumably knew that Vikings had turned up on the site. What?
Exactly. Exactly.
So I'm sorry, I'm guilty here of just reading the headline and looking at the pretty
Yeah.
picture, and that
Mm.
okay, that's a bit okay.
This segment hasn't developed in the way that you'd intended, has it?
No, oh dear. But it's an interesting find.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, I think what it highlights is the lack of inquisitiveness of the media in general when it comes to a glossy picture and an interesting, as you say, an interesting find, an interesting story.
Yeah.
We're actually dealing with a complicated backstory here as well, which
Mm.
isn't made clear until several paragraphs in, as you've just discovered.
Mm.
And that is the case of a lot of treasure reporting.
Mm-hmm.
It's also the point is never made, for example, that, as things stand at the moment, metal detectorists can sell their finds, but archaeologists don't.
So metal detectorists
Can sell their
sell
finds,
their finds. Yes.
or,
Yeah.
or receive a financial reward specific to the find, whereas archaeologists don't.
Mm.
And even and if if an archaeologist had made the equivalent find during the evaluation of that site, if assuming one's happened, then it wouldn't be in the in an auctioneer as being given a glossy photograph on a specially commissioned gaming board.
No.
Hopefully, it will be in a museum. That artifact belongs in a museum, on a specially commissioned gaming board, or not, as a centre of a nice display about local history. This is that goes right to the argument, the central argument about metal detecting, about when does a legitimate hobby for people who love archaeology and history, in the way that many archaeologists, members of local archaeology societies where they still exist, love local archaeology and history, and can be, and some societies could be criticised for having done excavations in the 1960s that still haven't been written up, and no one knows where the artifacts are now, and the 1970s and so on. The world of archaeology is not innocent in this, but metal detecting now is predicated on an individual finding and taking possession of artifacts without having a duty to report them, an ethical duty or a moral duty, and certainly not a legal duty to report them unless they fall into very specific criteria. Is history and knowledge disappearing? And then with the ability to sell it. I speak to metal detectorists, and there is an argument in the metal detecting community about this, because it is argued that, go back to rallies. A traditional metal detecting, somebody bought a metal detector, learned how to use it, probably from an older member of the club or something, who would be act as a mentor. They'd be taught about the local landscape. They'd meet local farmers. They'd work with local farmers on the permissions, and they work with local archaeologists. Archaeologists would know local detectorists, and they'd have a two-way conversation about what was being found, and metal detectors would help on excavations. They check spoil heaps, they check a strap before it was dug to highlight the possibility of small metal finds and so on, so things weren't missed in the archaeological context. I've done that on sites.
Hmm. Hmm.
There can be a very profitable relationship with people who metal detect, and the best ones are extremely skilled. But the
Fruitful, profitable might not be the right word there in terms of
intellectually
archaeology.
profitable,
Yeah,
intellectually profitable in terms of
yes,
archaeology. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Um, but there is an argument in metal detecting. Some metal detectors argue that what rallies have done is enable somebody to buy a cheap metal detector on eBay. Other sites are available, um, and go out and detect in the countryside, having paid your 20 quid in cash, without having to learn how to do it, without having to learn the ethics, without having to learn the local history, whatever. It is purely about finding stuff which you can then keep for yourself, or you can sell on through car boots, marketing sites. And if you hit the jackpot, okay, you can and although we do know, as we saw recently in the case of the Leinster hoard, you can try and dispose of a treasure hoard illegally, or if you choose to go through the bureaucratic process, and you absolutely should, of declaring it, because it's a legal requirement that you declare things under the Treasure Act, you will get a large financial reward.
Hmm.
So therefore, it ceases to be a hobby, and it's something that's done for profit, like doing the National Lottery.
Hmm.
You lay down some money in the hope you'll be getting a lot more money back at the end of it.
And I suppose I would just briefly add to that. This is possibly where seemingly innocuous things like dramas called detectorists, referring to prize money, is in fact unhelpful. I know that in the past you've argued that Detectorist is a wonderful series and essentially harmless, but it along with, for example, spokespeople and ministers describing history heroes when they're talking about metal detectorists who are often just seeking
Mm.
profit.
Yeah.
It it at the very least complicates the landscape. In so much as
Mm.
again, I don't want to. Uh, Unfortunately, when we talk about detectorists in the watching brief, we are almost always unnecessarily talking about misbehavior, bad behavior. Not all
Mm.
detectorists do this, but unfortunately, as so often is the case, once again, we're probably going to have to more or less end on a note of if legitimate members of that community need to get their house in order. If they want people like you and me to shut up and stop complaining about behaviour like
Mm.
this, then there needs to be a concerted effort to legitimise and to examine the examine this stuff closely. I mean, I suppose one of the issues, though, and this was highlighted in a comment that I saw recently on a video that we did about the Nebra Sky Disk, was someone
Mm.
saying, if you find something, that doesn't make you a looter. And I've sort of taken some time to sort of pull that apart a little bit, in so much as finding something, depending on the
Mm.
context, depending on who owns the land, depending on whether or not you're there with permission, depending on so many things, um, can itself be an illegitimate act. It can be a perfectly legitimate act. I
Mm.
suppose what makes you a looter is what happens next. It's not the finding necessarily that's the problem. And so, in that sense, it's not archaeologists who go, "Oh no, you found something I didn't find." It's more about uh, this the behavior that surrounds this action and these actions, and it's so difficult to talk about this stuff in a way which doesn't sound as though you're just trying to poo-poo someone else's potential
Yeah.
windfall. In so much as um, I'm often quite happy for people when they find something fascinating and interesting, and when they do eventually profit from it. Fine, wonderful, well done. If it's done properly. Um, and also, I do believe that people this idea of ownership of things, ownership of the past. I don't believe that archaeologists own the past, and also, I think in
No.
some way there has to be a negotiated ownership of our collective and communal histories and the artifacts that go with it, and
Mm.
and undoubtedly part of that will be people involved in the hobby finding things. It's just
Mm.
that this is a difficult path to walk, and sometimes
Mm.
organisations don't make it easy to look on the hobby in a charitable way, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, if that.
It's a complicated area, and the arguments will go on. I mean, without giving too much away, there's more to come on this story, and I think certainly the issue of rallies, it was already in question before the DCMS. In fact, it's one of the reasons DCMS, I think, launched a consultation about the amendments to the Treasure Act and the Portable Antiquities Scheme and so on before COVID. The report still hasn't come out, but I think there's a sense, even in the metal detecting community, that there may be restrictions coming in which weren't there before to metal detecting, which may well include rallies.
Okay.
On rallies. But
Well,
we'll see.
undoubtedly we'll return to this as well at
I'm
some
sure
point.
we will. And I'm still arguing Detectorist was written and researched before this became a serious issue, and in fact did cover the dark side of detectoring.
It was
In the
researched after the
in the
Staffordshire hoard
sense
was found, for goodness sake.
which raised a lot of questions about the ethics of metal
Yeah.
detecting and hoard finding and how they were, and also, to be fair, about whether large multinational corporations should buy up the rights to something and control them. The deal that Birmingham Museums did with Nat Geo for exclusive rights and so on, we're led to believe. So both sides of this have got questions to answer. I suppose the difference is, okay, I did the Burma Spitfires project as an archaeologist, and I've written a book about it for which I've had a small financial reward. That's perfectly legit in the same way as archaeologists get paid for what they do. But what and if you then reach an agreement with the publisher, you get to publish a book, and unless it's an academic publisher, you actually get paid for it.
And it might, and if it's not an academic publisher, the book might even be affordable to normal people.
Well, similar moral arguments are in play there about knowledge being kept from people for financial reasons, or by dint of a paywall, effectively. And anyway, Detectorist wasn't about metal detecting. It was about middle-aged blokes trying to find a purpose in life. That's certainly something I can identify with.
Okay, fair enough. Detectorists wasn't about metal detecting. Okay, well,
we're talking about art here. Just ignore the surface. We're talking about art. We're talking about the backstory, the subtext.
Okay,